It,
Hello, everyone. This is Denny Miller, and welcome to this week's Indy 500 Yesteryear, and today with Speedway Insiders Paul Page.
how you doing?
Bob Gates.
Hey.
And boy, this is going to be a great show. It's been long in coming. This is the third of our three-time winner installments. We've done Dario Franchitti. We've done Bobby Unser. As you can tell behind Mr. Gates there, we're going to be doing Johnny Rutherford and his three wins today. And we've talked to JR on the phone. He, in the future, he's looking forward to coming on this show. He thinks it's one heck of an idea. And
He just wants too much money.
I know.
Right.
No, that's not JR.
And as always, this show is dedicated to the memory of Robin Miller, and this is a perfect start to remembering Robin. We saw something that Paul Tracy said in talking about the turmoil in the Andretti camp, and also with Rossi going from one engine company to the other. So who knows Robin so well? We're going to turn this to Bob Gates, and you can analyze Paul Tracy's comment almost like Bobby Heenan stirring up Randy Macho Man Savage or something like that. What do you think of Tracy's trying to think that's a great idea, the controversy? And
Yeah. Well, and he's exactly right. And really what he said was that the league, the broadcaster should be using this to build rivalry with the, between a couple of three drivers and just to build interest. He doesn't really think there's going to be a lot of things happen. No repercussions on the track, but it's just a good opportunity to get some attention for the league and for IndyCar racing. So Paul's, he's right on with that. That's generally what makes any sporting event a little more attractive to viewers, to fans, is some of that drama going on between the particular individuals.
Having spent a little time in network television, Paul's pretty spot on in his concerns and in his commentary. It was interesting though, when we would try to build, we meaning the announcers, try to build some controversy, usually we got shut down, and we got shut down from the network through the sanctioning body because they didn't want any controversy because it might look bad for the corporate image.
Right. Yep, that's right. And that's still probably the attitude today.
how much were you told to tone it down, or tell Bobby Unser to tone it down to Sam over the years?
Oh, they never actually did that with us. They would say things like, with so and so isn't happy, and to which my response usually was, "Oh, I'm sorry." But no, they never, at no time in my career did anybody, and we're talking IndyCar, drag racing, you name it, anybody come and say, "We need you to slant this," because I guess in part they knew it wasn't going to happen. I think I had a reputation for that, but they still, they did influence, the sanctioning body did influence the network. Now, whether or not the network got that into the announcers, no, they did not. But they actually, what they influenced more was the participants in the confrontation themselves. You can't do that. I remember one time Steve Chassis, and it was totally appropriate because he had been hit by some car like 6 or 7 times that year, put one of the circles with a line through it on his rear wing when they had plenty of room, and the car number, the guy that kept hitting it. They all get that off of there. That doesn't look good for it. It looked great. It was wonderful.
Right. That's the thing that people like to see. But as you say, Paul, things tend to be vanilla in the corporate world.
Yeah.
And
I call it the astronaut syndrome. I'm cool. I'm not going to give you any controversial comment. And I'm having a lot of trouble with the idea that that any PR person would have thought that they could ask to delete video taken by a valid journalistic organization or pull a driver out of an interview that's being done. That just,
Yeah.
that's
That's
way,
over
way
the
across
top.
the line. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just over the top.
What have you heard since we reported that last week? Any news stories of that?
No, nothing of that at all. Which I'm kind of surprised. And it's too bad that the Auto Racing Writers and Broadcasters Association has pretty well fallen into ruin, because that was their thing. That's when they stood up for a journalist too, and they stood up with the backing of 300 or 400 other racing journalists. But we don't have that available now. So I guess just people like us need to pick at it a little and hope the message gets through.
Right, right.
I was kind of thinking the other day of Bobby and Sam together and what it was. What would have been like for you, Paul, had it been brother Al and Sam together?
Oh, entirely different. I don't think
I
Al
know.
would have said anything. No.
I was chuckling about that the other
I
day.
mean, if you crank Al up enough, I think you get some fine answers. But generally speaking, he was the easigoing, everything's cool kind of guy. Whereas Uncle Bobby, he was the head of the family and he knew what he was talking about.
Was Paul Tracy ever around Bobby Unser much, both in the booth?
Not in the booth, but
that would have been an interesting.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have no idea why Paul Tracy is not on the broadcast. He is so good and brings so much to it. And not to criticize the people who are doing it now, but maybe I mentioned this before. One of the things that Collins taught me was when you bring in new people, you make sure their voices are distinct so that when they start talking, you know who they are, because they can't see them. So that you wanted distinct voices that way, and they don't have that now. And they really need. And Paul Townsend's still racing, or Townsend Bell is still, is still racing. So he's not going to say anything controversial. Right. JR had the same problem because he hadn't retired, and we were using him on NBC, and he wouldn't get controversial because he had to protect his own situation with regard to future sponsorship.
Sure.
Townsend's got that problem. Hinchcliffe doesn't have that problem, but I think he is concerned with his own likability. And because he comes recently from the drivers, he doesn't want to go after those guys, because hey, we're going to go have a drink later or something. He's still more a driver than he is a commentator.
Yeah.
Hopefully that'll change, because the commentator's role is to create that controversy and to say, this or that is wrong. It shouldn't have happened. I got to tell you, David Croft, who does the Formula One, I actually sent him a fan letter this weekend.
Really?
After the Austrian race. I've been meaning to do it. He is just incredibly good at what he does. And I say that from my perspective, knowing what they're up against in the booth, what else is going on. He keeps a wonderful balance. He keeps people moving through the telecast. I said, hey, I got to send this guy a fan letter.
Well
deserved.
Yeah, I think
one of the things in the article, and Paul, you've been around the engine people a lot. How big a deal is it going from Honda to Chevy? Are they really terrified that lots of trade secrets are going to be lost?
No, they don't know any trade secrets. That engine is brought out by a guy from Honda or Chevrolet. He monitors it being put in a chassis. He takes control of it. There are strict definitions of where the engine begins and the team work on the car stops. Because you got, is it at the turbocharger? Is it at the engine? Is it at the plenum? Where does that stop? Now that's all been worked out, but because say the team of Gates and Page, we have our car and we start messing around with the the piping going into the turbo or whatever that could change the engine's performance and possibly damage it. So now a driver, he could say, oh, I don't have power in this range, maybe, and they may actually listen to him. But no, I don't even think the team has all that much input.
Interesting point. Well, we're going to shift to our third of the three-time winners, Johnny Rutherford. And my first recollections of Johnny Rutherford was in 1963 when he came on the scene at Daytona, young driver, and really looked impressive in the Smoky Unique car. And that set the stage for him being a lot more visible when he came to Indy in May and everything. Bob, you remember that when his foray into NASCAR in Daytona?
He won one of the qualifying races, his first year there at Daytona. I had the opportunity before he passed away to talk to Smokey Unique. He was at the Speedway one year. And I asked him in particular why he chose Johnny Rutherford, to drive his car that year in 1963 at Daytona. And he said he had called Herb Porter and told Herb Porter he wanted a driver that knew absolutely nothing about stock car racing. He wanted the dumbest driver about stock car racing he could find. So Porter said, well, try Johnny Rutherford. Okay. Nothing disparagingly against Johnny, but Johnny really never driven a stock car as such, and NASCAR stock car. He did start off in modified. So anyway, the point was Smokey wanted somebody he could show how to run just the way that he wanted to. And obviously they were successful at that.
Very easily, I guess you could build a case. Rutherford could have been very much a David Pearson, Vinnie Parsons, very successful had he chosen a career in NASCAR and everything the way
Yeah, but I think you have to remember that his background was really USAC and sprint cars.
Mhm.
Witness his performance at Eldora, where he decided to become an airplane and go over the wall back there. But he's also one of the very few drivers, I mean, we're talking Foyt, Unser, both the Unsers, that actually came out of the USAC sprint cars, meaning front engine, rear wheel drive cars, and was able to actually make the transition into rear engined Indy cars, which is quite a transition. But they were able to do it. But they all came from a front engine background. And I was out at Putnamville a couple of weeks ago, and the PA announcer was kind enough to ask me to come up and say a few words. And he kept talking about, well, the sprint cars, this is where the IndyCar drivers of the future come from. And I was trying to be polite with him, but it's unfortunately it is not.
No,
it's the kid that can get in a go-kart at age 7 and run a bunch of road races that actually gets the Indy rides today.
But it certainly put him on the visibility map in May of '63. And
it was great. He had both arms in casts, and so part of the joke would be that he might come around the garage area, and if you saw him coming, you took off because he needed somebody to help him in the men's room. No, John, I'm good. You go ahead.
you find out who your real friends are.
Yeah. I don't think he had that many in that regard.
Well, what we're referring to, he had won the 1965 sprint car championship, and that was a big deal to win the sprint car championship in those days.
Sure.
And then in April of '66 at Eldora, he just had one hell of a tumble, way up in the air. And fortunately, he lands on his wheels when he went down 45 feet or whatever it is at Eldora. Broke both arms. I think he had maybe a head injury and some other injuries, but it certainly didn't look like he would survive that. That was before the cages even. And it cost him the entire season. He was pretty optimistic of that ride he was going to have at Indy that May, and and missed the season. But Rutherford makes the 1963 Indy 500 as a rookie. It was a great rookie class. Uncle Bobby was in that class. Perhaps one of the greatest ever. Jimmy Clark was in that class. Art Malone was in the class as well. And it was a
So who did we vote as rookie of the year? I can't remember that.
Clark.
Kenny? Clark?
Clark got it. Well, he
Yeah,
got second.
Yeah,
too.
that
Yeah,
makes
there you
sense.
go.
Yeah.
Highest placing rookie. Yeah.
Right,
And,
right.
Bobby crashed on first or second lap in the
I
Novi.
remember watching that from the grandstand.
And,
And boy, that
Art
car's an idiot.
Malone lasted probably one more lap in the Finn Novi.
Oh, Bobby, wasn't Bobby in a Novi too?
Yeah, he was
Yeah,
in
right.
the car that Bobby Marvin was to
Right. Thank you for
Uh,
that.
and a teammate to Hurtubise, and Hurtubise sat it on the middle of the front row in that thrilling late drive on a very windy pool day in 1963. It was just
Bobby told me once, you talk about that crash, and I think it was on the second lap, towards the beginning of the second lap, but he said
Yep.
before the race, Granatelli told him he wanted him to be passing 5 cars a lap. That was his goal. And Bobby said his mistake was listening to Andy Granatelli.
I suspect that's the last time Bobby listened to anybody.
Yeah, right.
but he made the race that year, but Rutherford went through a fairly long spell of not a lot of success at Indy. He was good in the sprinters, but with not a lot of success. In 1964, he went through the fire that kills Eddie Sachs and Dave McDonald, and he gets burnt. With second-degree burns on the back of his neck, and is taken to the hospital and everything. He really doesn't talk about that much, but he went right through it. And the Eddie Sachs, this is the only time that I recall this ever happening, wore a lemon around on a string around his neck. And they found that lemon in Rutherford's cowling later on, that it had went from Sachs to Rutherford's race car. Then the Eldora crash, he's lucky to survive that. And he really didn't do a lot until the surprising year of 1970, when he drove for Mike Devon, and that kind of that wedge-shaped car surprised a lot of people by qualifying second to Big Al on the pole that year. How big a surprise was that to you, Paul, when Johnny Rutherford started in the middle of the front row?
He had no business being there.
Right.
It surprised the daylights out of me, because in reality, that car should have been a 4th row car.
Oh,
Yeah.
easily, yeah.
So he drove the daylights out of it to do that.
Yeah.
That was very impressive.
Yeah, I forget how old that car was, maybe 4 years
It
old.
wasn't brand new, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and he came very, very, very close to bumping Al off the pole. Al had been the favorite all month and had ran before JR did, and what everybody assumed was the pole position. And Rutherford just came so very close. And again, I forget the exact times now, but it was a thrill for all the fans gathered there for sure.
And then along came McLaren.
Yes, and
Just like behind Bob right there. If you lean to your right for a second, there's Johnny.
There you are. And that's at McLaren, I believe. At the
It is.
McLaren factory.
mhm.
Or McLaren.
But yeah, that I would almost. Do you think the front row start in 70 indirectly led to the McLaren ride? I kind of do. What do you think, Bob?
Well, I don't know if it led to, that really is what,
Or the eye
That's
opener.
really- that's really what put JR on the map as far
Yeah.
as IndyCar racing. He really got a lot of people's attention with that run. And as you say, he didn't do that well prior to that, but it just showed people that he did have the ability, the talent to do it. And, you know, he's,
At first, he was a backup driver to Peter Revson. I mean,
Yeah.
he wasn't the primary guy in the stable.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
It changed though in 1970. Well, he was teammate with John Cock, I believe, in 72. But it was in 73 when I think a lot of people thought Rutherford or someone would be the one that would break the 200-mile barrier.
Yeah.
Bobby came so close in 72 with the Olsenite Eagle car. And I remember that day, it was just a miserable, windy, overcast day, not ideal at all for speed. And Johnny Rutherford wins the pole, I think at 199. I think I left that day a little disappointed that they didn't break the 200-mile barrier. Bob,
They were right there.
Yeah.
I mean, Gordy had done it in a Goodyear test. Of course, that didn't count at all. It was partway secret. I actually have a piston out of that car that Gordy broke
Oh.
200 with.
That's neat.
Yeah, I collect that kind of stuff, you know, weird stuff. But yeah, that I was surprised that it wasn't broken then, and I was surprised how long it took.
mhm.
Yeah. I think maybe the weather conditions did
Yeah.
contribute to them falling just short of that.
Yep.
No, it was that kind of started a tragic month with the loss of Art Pollard that day as well. I had kind of I had known Art Pollard's wife fairly well. And because of that, I got to know Art Pollard, of course. And then Robin was a very, very good friend of Art Pollard. So it kind of hit home in multiple ways. Rutherford.
Part of speaking, since you're speaking of Robin, there's a picture of this first test of a Formula Ford out at Raceway Park. And Art Pollard is there on crutches because of an accident and he couldn't drive that year. But Art's out there helping Robin learn how to be a race car driver. Art was just a good guy. I mean, he helped people and he was good.
How surprised were you that they didn't break 200, Bob, that day?
Well, like both of you said already, they were right there, and it was somewhat disappointing. I think everyone anticipated them breaking it that year, and it just didn't happen. They just fell that little bit short, whether it was weather conditions or some other issues. But yeah, disappointing.
Well,
Very much.
that sets the stage for 1974, and someone happened to get an assignment on radio in 1974. Paul, tell us about how your assignment in the North Pits came about. That had to been a thrill, I would imagine.
Oh my God, you have no idea. I mean, especially having been told that you're not going to ever be on our radio network, you know. But and with the happenings 73 and the terrible start, and they opened up the pits, made them a little longer, and did some improvements at the track to make it safer. And so, yeah, got the call. Paul, we want you to work the North Pits. And, you know,
And who made that call? Was that Sid?
my good friend, mentor, buddy, family member, Sid Collins.
Sid Collins. Did you have an inkling that might come?
No, didn't have a clue. In fact, just the opposite. I mean, he had been pretty fairly often. He would tell me, you know, this is good what you did or that, or you learned. I mean, he was teaching me. I think more for much of the time, so this I'd be a better broadcaster. I don't think there was a thought of bringing me on the network when he started. I just happened to be at WIBC in the evening. Sid did his sportscast, and he was a sports director there at WIBC, and they had 15-minute sportscasts in those days. So that came up at 7, and I'm on for the rest of the evening doing newscasts on the hour. so Sid and I sit and start talking. And like I say, you may remember that after I did an interview with the winner at the Soapbox Derby Hill, the Wilbur Shaw Hill here in Indy, Sid was waiting for me and said, "Oh, that's the worst thing I think I've ever heard." So no, because he kept telling me no, I believed him.
I missed the hot dog eating contest. That was the hot dog eating contest was better than the Soapbox Derby contest.
You're really pushing your luck here. You're lucky you're not sitting here, buddy. By the way, the hot dog contest here really sucked. Joey wasn't really up for it, but he won, but way off the right.
Now, as an announcer, would you get as many free Nathan hot dogs as you wanted as well?
Yeah, I could.
Good.
Except they're too rich for me.
Too rich.
I mean, I love them, but I can eat like a quarter of one. Yeah.
But Jerry Baker was also new that that year. What would have been considered a more plum assignment as fledglings, to be on the backstretch, what he got, or the North Pit, what you got?
Well, at first I'm thinking the North Pit is the garbage pit. It's all the slow guys. Then once the race got going, I realized these are also the guys that tend to fail and fall out first. So the guys down in the South pits, Lou Palmer, he couldn't interview any of his people because they were out winning the race. My guys were out just trying to make it to lap 50. So I got a lot of good interviews out of that. On the other hand, if you look at Bake in the middle of the backstretch, we had that had 5 positions, not including the anchor of the race, Sid. So Bake had in those, and there was a time when that was a really necessary position, middle of the backstretch. But I think Bake had maybe 4 seconds to do his call in those laps, just because they were so fast now. We took the backstretch away shortly thereafter, and he moved on to better positions. But he didn't. Bake, go. Thank you.
How well did you know Jerry Baker at that time?
He was at WIBC as well, and I knew him very well, and I knew him actually from when he was a disc jockey at WIFE in the city, because I loved his disc jockey work. He was the afternoon drive guy for a long time, and he had his show was a Jerry Baker's pool party. And so every now and then you'd hear a ding and he'd say, "Okay, it's time to turn over and get Son on the other side." And occasionally he'd run some audio in of, people laughing in the background like they do at a pool. Yeah, and I really enjoyed that. I mean, Jerry was an incredible professional. He did so many different things. Hell, he helped teach me how to do football. He actually took a day off, went up to then the RCA Dome, and the Colts were playing. We got a position way up top and put out a tape recorder, and we did back and forth play-by-play. He was the analyst, and so he took that tape and he taught me from it. So he was one of the best broadcasters I've ever known.
I want to. This is kind of a sad thing to report. A dear friend of mine, Steve McClure's health is not good at all. I want to keep him in our prayers. Steve was a veteran broadcaster, had really a niche in doing a variety of internet type sports with medium-sized high schools, doing things like golf and volleyball and all that other stuff that was pretty remarkable. But he would do work on the Colts with the person that would give the who did what play and everything, and he would tell them and everything. So keep Steve in your prayers and everything. If you never knew him, he was just he's a fantastic person, a huge race fan, and a veteran broadcaster. And he went to Ball State as well, so he was in that.
Oh, there you go.
Letterman type of.
I didn't understand it at first, but when you said Ball State, I realized you're old school. Gets another plug. You want to plug the book while you're at it?
No, but I'll put in a plug for the Boilers this year. If they beat Penn State, they could be off and running and everything. Where did you go to college, Paul? I don't know that.
I went to the University of Tulsa, in Oklahoma into their school of broadcasting. And I was brilliant. I failed all of the core topics, humanities, such like stuff like that. I excelled truly in the broadcasting side, but it wasn't sufficient to get me back to the University of Tulsa, or Tulsa University is the real name. So that said, Paul, you're either going to join the Army or you're going to get drafted. Which my stepdad, who was an Army officer retired, pointed out. So I guess I better join something. So that was all the college I had.
Well, McClure and I had a deal with Dara Weibel on a daily basis, and I think it was a contest who could do the better Dara Weibel imitation or something. How about you on football Saturday? Who would you most cheer for, Bob?
Oh, gosh. Usually Purdue or Notre Dame. See, I went to the IU Purdue University extension in Indianapolis. So I can be an IU fan or I can be a Purdue fan. Mm-hmm. So usually I cheer for Purdue in football and IU in basketball. And that seems to work out pretty well.
It's a neat place. Karina went there to get her nursing degree, and it was I love that Broad Ripple area and that she went down.
It's just gotten better and better. Broad Ripple, and now South Broad Ripple has been alive for 7 or 8 years. I mean, you come to Indy, you got to go to those places.
Oh my God, you can gain 10 pounds coming a couple of weeks. Just the restaurants in Broad Ripple alone are just
and on Mass Avenue downtown.
Yeah.
This is a great city to live in. I mean, it's got a lot of good stuff.
It really is.
By the way, a good friend of mine, who I told about how good Iron Skillet was and us going, wants to go to Hollyhock as well.
You mentioned that. Is he buying?
If I could, I don't know. He knows that you are pretty wealthy now. You're in the Hall of Fame, so. But
if I pay a buck and a half, I can get a coffee at Starbucks.
Now, can you? I'm not out here.
Probably not.
So anyway, this pit reporter on the north end of the pits makes his maiden debut, if you would, and for 1974. He's scared at all?
Oh, scared to death. Yeah. I mean, try and visualize 113 million people, and try to get your head into that. And that's that was the big sales point all the time. We're global, which was unknown in those days. Now everybody's global, big deal. But then to have a broadcast of a car race or anything that went around the world, it was relayed on short wave, was translated into 7 different languages. I mean, that was a huge, huge deal. And with that comes all the pressure of the fear that you get, knowing that if one, you don't want to screw up because you look stupid, which I was pretty good at. But more importantly, if you did something wrong, you couldn't correct it for a year. And that rode pretty heavy with me, that we had an even greater obligation to the coverage of the Indianapolis 500 to make sure that we didn't have those kind of mistakes. And if you listen to Sid's broadcast, he would slow us down. Now wait until you have the facts. He'd say right out and on the air. So yeah, it was a huge.
What were the couple of top things that serve as your memory from that first year there that stood out?
Well, I remember Dick Simon coming into pits. He had some issue fairly early on, I think within the first 30 laps. And he got out of his car in those days and he worked on it, kind of Foyt-like. And so then he had to stand back while a couple of his mechanics did stuff for him. So I interviewed him and he was standing there, he wasn't doing anything. Hey, you want to talk? Sure. Well, Sid made a very big deal out of that I was in his view, the first reporter who ever interviewed a driver who was still in the race. A little bit of a push, I think, but it was nice to do, nice to get the compliment. And then the race went on. The end of the race, of course, involved people that I really cared about. So that was good too. That was very good.
What was the feedback from Sid Collins after the race?
He always wrote everybody a note of some kind or another. And in this case, he wrote me a note that essentially said, "Good job. I will see you next year," which was a big deal because for the most part, you didn't know if you were going to work the next year. Sid had this little thing going to where he wouldn't tell you, and you would find out that you were working sometime in April if you got an invitation to the breakfast, the radio network for the race. And, we all be calling one another, later. I was like, "Did you get the invitation yet?" And of course, I think somebody, I think Baker especially screw with you, "Oh yeah, I had mine weeks ago." But yeah, but that's the only way you knew. I mean, that was one of the best kept secrets ever. Who's going to work next year?
Were you listening to Page's maiden commentary from the North Pits, Bob, in Indianapolis? Were you listening to?
Well, I was at the race, so, but of course
I was going to ask who was better
on the radio broadcast.
Who was better that day, Baker or Page?
Well, like I say, I was at the race, so
after it.
I better not get into that.
No,
I think Paul had more airtime, I'm sure.
You did just bring up a memory from sitting in the grandstand. I think you probably can attest to it, Bob, that the PA at that time didn't do, spot coverage in the corners or anything. Yeah. So you'd get a yellow light over on the main straightaway, and everybody would dive for their radios. And, you'd see 100 radios in front of you come up to the ear because, of course, the radio network was actually covering whatever it was. Right. I always thought that was just so cool. It's like, well, we have a yellow flag out. I'm like, "Oh, everybody grab your radio."
That was standard equipment for fans in those days.
Yeah.
Is a transistor radio along with the chicken and the cooler of beer, because you listened and found out really what was going on with the radio broadcast.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, 74, I think, really kind of changed Indy for the worse. This supposed fuel shortage that they had. They were coming off all the bad press and the accidents that happened that took Sweet Savage's life, and they put almost cut in half the fuel capacity they could have in carry on the car. Qualifying, they put the control the boost on it, and that chance of breaking 200 that they flirted with in 73, they're lucky to run 190 in 74. And then on top of that, those people who were really traditionalists, kind of like myself, loving the 4 days of time trials, even though necessarily things don't go on, but things do go on, even though things aren't going on. And they dropped that from 4 days to 2 days, with the being both Saturdays. The first Saturday was basically pool day. The following Saturday was bubble day. And within that first day, the first half of the day was basically day one. The second half was day two. And as if the racing gods got even with them by raining, and it messed it all up. They never got to see it play out. Rutherford really got caught up in that. He lost an engine. He was right at Foyt speed to contend for the pole, and then winds up qualifying 25th because of having the engine change. And he mounts one of the best charges to the front that Indy has seen. And between two Texans, Foyt and Rutherford, you were there in the pits. You saw it, Paul. What did you think of that? excitement. Now Johnny Rutherford truly looks like he could win, be an
Oh, yeah.
Indy 500 winner that day.
And I think he had most of the headlines too, because he was so approachable, so much fun. I mean, he'd see a fan and he'd walk right over to him, spend time with him. He was the perfect guy to win an Indianapolis 500.
Yeah.
But yeah, just, well, I back up on some things you said, Denny, because you've nailed it perfectly. 73, you have the fuel crisis. And so everybody got scared and decided it couldn't be a 30-day race, a 4-week in May, the 30 days in May that we all still speak of. And they cut it down to 2. And so what that did wasn't so much what it did to the qualifying, but what it did to the practice, because, well, going out to the Indy 500 was like a rite of passage for school kids. And if you're a teenager, going out to the snake pit was a rite of passage too.
Right.
But in those days, all of us, we'd look up and here'd come 10 bright yellow school buses, and all the first, second, and third graders would just roll off of it. And for the most part, most of the drivers went over and greeted them right away. Kids didn't have a clue who they were, but it was nice. You had the time to do those kinds of things.
Right.
Now it's just so intense. But on the other hand, Mark Miles, I think, did a great job in putting the Grand Prix at the start. And he had told me once that was his intent, was at least to get a semblance of the 30 days in May back. That qualifying had left the station, but and they did accomplish that. So I like that.
All right, let's say, had they kept it the 4 days of time trials, had they not cut the boost, surely they would have broken 274.
Oh yeah, easy.
And I think you would have had a huge crowd, and you started to see a decline in people coming, knowing that there was not the likelihood of hearing Tom Carnegie and his famous words. It's you're pretty good at, can you do a Carnegie for us, Bob, how you would do it?
Well, I don't think the
new
crowd really, I don't think there was really a turn down quite that early. Pole Day was such a tradition. And yeah, it was about the speed, but not every year was there a track record broken.
But the potential was always there to break it. And this year that year didn't exist at all.
And there was some letdown on some people's part. It was kind of a letdown for the fans, and you heard a lot about it in the media. Back then, local, if you lived in Indianapolis, I mean, there was several radio stations that did reports on the hour from the track, or every 15 minutes from the track. TV at night after the news would sometimes have as much as a half-hour show covering what went on at the track that day. And I remember just a little bit of the letdown, even on the part of the media, telling the story leading to the build-up for Pole Day. There was some disappointment, letdown, knowing that no, the track record would not be broken. But the crowd was still there.
I still think at least to the Speedway's credit, they did not do what Daytona did and drop 20 laps off the race and run in a theory the Indy 450. I'm glad that they cut it other ways so it was still a 500-mile race, but it did not have the buzz. But that
you were talking about Daytona, right?
Daytona, yeah. But the Rutherford Foyt back and forth created that buzz on race day, and AJ broke later on in the race. Speculate had he not had a problem, Paul, what that race might have ended like.
I just was trying to look up the lap chart on that, the leader laps, and I can't, but if Foyt's on the track, he's dangerous. And now you got two Texans. Well, not really two Texans, because Johnny Rutherford grew up in Wichita Falls, Kansas.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yep.
He put that star on his hat, but he's not necessarily a Texan. And by the way, I'm not doing that just for you guys. I do it to him every time I see it. But yeah, you took a great deal of the marquee out of it when you lost Foyt out of the race. You lost that potential incredibly close finish, and it might not have been JR. So, but you can't go around with what might have been. You
Right.
go with what you got.
Right. Those two battles, that was one of the more, that was very comparable to Parnelli and AJ in '64, before Parnelli's pit fire, and how they kind of battled back, and you didn't know on that. But Rutherford wins his first Indy and comes back the next year, not in a McLaren colored car, but a Gatorade colored car, and finishes second. Johnny's going to tell us when he's on how he should have won that race that year, and some interesting pit strategy cost him that win. But now it's 76. I remember the patriotism going around that year with the bicentennial that was going to happen. They build the new magnificent, compared to the original one, Speedway Museum. It just looked like everything was going to be tremendous. Rutherford's on the pull again, but still it's not that track record. But there was an excitement, I think, because of that. Bob Hope was there that day in 1976 for the 500-mile race. And it turns out to be, to me, one of the more disappointing Indy 500s ever, because of that ugly word rain. And just a tremendous race. And as it was, they kind of thought maybe it wouldn't rain as soon as it did. They knew it was going to be afternoon rains, but I think it kind of surprised them in that, raining at Brownsburg now type of scenario that they talk about. But they really got going. Foyt had it lead, and he had something break in his car that affected his handling, and Rutherford was able to pull away. And the disappointing thing to me, I remember it raining on lap 100. Can you remember that, either one of you? And they allowed that thing to go past the halfway point.
Yeah, got to 101.
And then that was the disappointing thing. The amazing thing was the attrition did not knock out most of the front runners that day. And you look down 1 through 10, and there's Hall of Fame drivers all the way up and down the thing that could have survived. Let's speculate a little bit. And Johnny Rutherford, well, for those who weren't there, the track got totally soaked. It dried. The weather kind of became nice. Sun came out. They had the jets out. It dried the track. Benford, that was Tom. Benford was his 3rd year as the chief steward. Says we're going to be starting the race in 15 minutes or so. Some drivers were in the car, and then what happened?
Rained again.
Yeah.
And
A
lot, and it ruined the racetrack. And Rutherford made that walk to victory lane instead of driving to it.
I got in trouble with Sid that year because JR was out of the car, and they still had the cars aligned so that they could start the race again if they wanted to. So he was there, and I thought he was a fair target, so I interviewed him. And later somebody said Lou Palmer interviews the winner of the race. Got it. The other Rutherford Indy 500 win that I especially liked was when he picked up Tim Richmond as a hitchhiker and brought him around on the side fence. That was just Yeah, that was so
1980.
much fun.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, that's everybody, I think, is aware of the fact that the first time Johnny ran 500 miles at Indy, he won. That
Yeah.
was the first time he'd ran 500 miles. But, you know, Johnny just ran 500 miles twice in his career.
Mhm.
And that was in 74. Then 1980 was
Mhm.
went the full 200 laps.
Right.
So that stat always fascinated me. You know, and Johnny was, of course, an excellent driver, 3-time 500 winner. I don't know how many times he won the championship, probably close to 30 races total, but just ran 500 miles twice in his entire career.
Now, while the rain was drying or it stopped raining, Foyt was able to work on his car and had it repaired. So what was causing him to lose some ground to Rutherford late in the race might have been, what would have been corrected, that could have been a most interesting sprint until the next rain came, whenever it would have come. So the fans kind of got cheated on that one. I left very much more so than 73 or 75. It was disappointing that it only went 102 laps or so.
Well, you should have asked for your money back.
I think I did ask Tony Holman that, and he said something, that's the reason we run the race.
Yeah, something to that effect.
Was that what, that's kind of his
Yeah.
standard response, I think.
Yeah.
It's always disappointing for everybody when it doesn't go the full distance. And because you know, what might have happened, what if, what might have been, but that's the thing with racing.
That's why we have shows like this, so we can
Right.
use our incredible expertise and suggest what should or might have happened.
It was a pretty interesting rookie class, similar to 68 when you had Vukovic and Bettenhausen. You had Pancho Carter, son of Dwayne Carter, and Johnny Parsons, son of Johnny Parsons.
Right.
Those were rookies that year. Pancho, who was just one tremendous midget sprint car driver, had some difficulties that day, but he persevered and finished in the top 10 and got Rookie of the Year. Two other interesting rookies, Jan Opperman made the race that year. Opperman was just beyond incredible on the dirt. Maybe a little Judd Larson-ish in that he was not all that good at Indy, but tremendous person whose career really got sidetracked with that horrible crash at the Hoosier 100. He tried to come back a couple years later and got re-injured again, and it pretty much made him bedridden, I think, for the most part, the rest of his life. Another interesting rookie was Bill Simpson, who did not have that successful career as a race car driver, but parlayed his passion into creating the Simpson safety products. Anything stand out to you about both of you on Simpson's safety products?
Well,
I'll start with you.
First,
What
I
was
think we
it?
got it. I'm sorry.
Paul, when we saw a photo, didn't we see a photo recently of Bill
Yeah,
Simpson?
him and his fire suit thing.
Oh, yeah. Tell that story.
Well, I think it was he twice to proof and performance got in one of his fire suits and had a lot of gasoline poured on him and had it lit up. And he'd sit there and wave his arms around and everything. Then they'd come in eventually and put it out with a fire extinguisher. And that was pretty impressive stuff. Except one of those times, and I think it was the second time he did it, he was so exuberant about it that as soon as they had the fire out, he pulled his gloves off. And then he reached up to take the helmet off helmet was still hot from the fire. I mean, it was like, ah! No, we didn't laugh. No, we didn't. And I got to remember, he was a Vietnam veteran too.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Bill really got, I feel, unjustly criticized on the death of Dale Earnhardt.
Yeah.
And if the stories were true, he was getting death threats as if it was his fault that Earnhardt got killed. Did Bill ever talk to you about, either one of you, about that?
No.
No. But it was happening. But
He-
Yeah,
he-
but there was a sanctioning body that didn't really enforce their rules on
Yeah.
Earnhardt. So he's
Mhm.
sitting in there, Bob, a Ford Econoline seat,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they wonder how he got spun around and killed. The accident looked horrible if you knew what to look for. You saw that turning moment in the accident, you knew that wasn't good. In fact, on the television broadcast, you could see Dale Waltrip looking up track, and while everybody else is like, well, I just tapped the wall kind of thing, and Dale was looking at it and he knows what just happened. And but they danced it off the air, and of course the announcement of his passing wasn't made for several hours.
And then Rutherford wins then his third in 1980, driving the Jim Hall Yellow Submarine.
Yeah.
The year before, Al Unser had dominated the early stages in that. That would have been Al's fourth win. What caused the split between Jim Hall and Al Unser? You're a pretty good friend of Al, Bob. Did he ever say?
Well, yeah. And it's been well reported. Robin really reported it, that he left because he felt like Jim Hall took too much credit for the design of that, what became the Yellow Submarine, when the particular engineer that, in fact, Al had talked into joining that team was the one that did the real design work on the car. So, Al just felt like it wasn't right, and he left. And I know Robin told this story that for whatever reason, Al's just not the outgoing personality that Bobby was, but Robin always said Al just didn't seem like he cared about me, didn't like me. And, who knows?
How could that be? How could that possibly be?
Yeah, exactly. But he said after I wrote that story, and I believe it was Michigan, when the story came out, Robin was walking by Al's garage, and Al stopped him and thanked him for reporting that and writing that story like he did. So that's why he left the team.
I think you build a very strong argument that had Al driven that car in 80 instead of Rutherford, Al would have been a four-time winner that day.
Yeah.
Now, would knowing Uncle Bobby like you did, would Bobby have left that car in 80 like Al did, or would he been in that car with Jim Hall?
Well,
I think Bobby would have stayed certainly with it.
well, the public relations that Al was reacting to would never have gone that way, because Bobby would have flat said he was everything to the car. The car wouldn't have existed without him. So, Bobby, I think would have stayed with the car if for no other reason he recognized that car's capability. I mean, in 80, that car was hands above everything else in the field.
Mm-hmm.
That was a remarkable race car.
Right.
And pretty much Johnny toys with the field that day and wins. Kind of interesting side note to that, Tom Steva had an accident and had to go to his backup car and started 33rd and worked his way up to finish second, what would have been his third time finishing second. But he led some of the race, so that became the only person to ever started last to lead the race, unless it's happened since that time. But that was the first time that happened for sure on that. And Gary Bettenhausen, who barely made the race, that he almost got bumped. and he finishes third in a car that was 2 or 3 years old.
Yeah, him,
I think his sister Susie told me the story. Gary told his wife, well, have the car ready. I don't think that we're going to have a very long day today.
right.
And so he wins his third that day. There was a couple interesting rookies in that race. Tim Richmond that you mentioned, his car broke, and Rutherford picks him up and drives him down to victory lane. It's
Yeah, that was the image. That was the whole image of that race. And
Yeah.
it was a great image. It
And
was
Ron
really-
Burton, who I think just was tremendous as a racing artist, captured that as his commission piece of work for that year, driving down. Also Richmond that year as a rookie, just he was a threat to win the pole.
He was good.
And on pole day, he crashes the Uno car. He could have very well sat on the pole that day. And then we had the brother duo of Bill and Don Whittington make the race. And we're going to ask our friends who are viewers that like to have some Bill or Don Whittington stories or Tim Richmond stories to write us at Speedway Insiders at gmail.com. We could probably go a long time on Bill and Don Whittington and their alleged use of drug money to fund their race cars, and also how good Tim Richmond was, and then he going to NASCAR and really looking great there. I've always wondered what happened had he stayed just in Indy cars, what his career would have been like. So next week we're where? At what racetrack? One of your favorite tracks.
I don't know.
Isn't it
Bob's
Toronto
mine.
next week?
Oh,
I think it's
Toronto, aren't
Toronto
they?
next week. And
I'm sorry.
I think it's Toronto next week,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Oh, that's what you're talking. Yeah,
Yeah.
Toronto's cool.
Are either one of you going to it?
Nah, can't do it.
Well,
Unless
Next
you
one-
want to, I can get a pass if you'll pay my way up there.
oh, okay.
Oh, I'm so glad to see it back on the schedule.
I am too. And
It's a neat track. It's a challenging track. That right-hander at the Princess Gate right after the start finish line, and then that long run to another right-hander. And of course, that right-hander is where all the action happens, especially on the first lap. But just a challenging circuit, and Canadians are just incredible race fans.
Mhm.
And so it fills up all the time. They're going to do it again. I don't have any inside information, but I'm sure they're going to do it again. And the atmosphere of the place the whole weekend is just great. You know, that's a neat racetrack and a good time.
So next
if you
week
don't-
we'll be commenting on what happened there as part of
Right? Yeah.
being
bring it up.
our Speedway Insiders.
You know,
We may have a surprise guest on next week or something like that too.
that'd be cool. That'd be cool.
Mike has talked about when it works for him to come on and tell about his vintage racing program. Mike Leschmuth that we're referring to, which I think will be highly interesting. He shares this fantastic garage with Rick Duman and restoring all these vintage cars. And he was part of the Johnny Lightning team for a while too. So I think he's going to be an interesting guest. Johnny Rutherford's indicated he wants to be on in the near future. We're going to have a blend of not only drivers, but people who just highly interesting individuals making up that community of IndyCar family and things. So anyway, this ends our
Whoa. Always end it before I can get stuff in.
No, I was going to say this ends it and we're going to have final thoughts. So I'll let you have final thought there, Mr. Page.
I have a final thought.
Okay.
Under the subject of corrections, which being the incredible journalists we are, very important. It was brought to my attention that while you mentioned that Bobby won in 3 different decades,
Mhm.
Mears also did that. I got an email about that. Easy mistake, but we need to honor Rick as well. And when I was talking about the problem with the PR person at when that fracas broke out at Mid Ohio, when I was mentioning that, I attributed the newspaper article to Doyle, and it was really Nate Brown, who was the IndyCar reporter for the Indy Star. And I apologize for that. He's a good reporter. He needs credit.
Yeah, and I read that too about Rick Mears. How could I make such a dumb? I guess that's too much Jack Daniels or something over the years.
No, the Jack Daniels should have helped it.
Maybe, but it didn't. But that's accurate. So, but that
Have
is
to make
kind of
you-
neat to win in 3 different decades.
Yeah, that's special.
I jokingly tell our good friend Gary Irvin, if he runs once this year, then he could say he's the first person who drove in 8 different decades. And you could know what he tells me on that and everything. So your final thoughts, Bob?
Just looking forward to the weekend. I wish we had a race every weekend. As you can tell, there is some type of racing going on all the time. So you can tell I'm more of an IndyCar fan than anything else, although I do enjoy it all. But looking forward to see what's going to happen at Toronto. Like Paul said, it's great that they're back up there. Passionate fans, and we'll see what the crowd's like, and we'll see how the Andretti drivers treat each other in Toronto.
Now, there's few people that are a better ambassador for the sport of racing than Johnny Rutherford. We're glad to be able to chronicle his 3 wins and what could have been even more. And we'll let him tell about when he's on why he didn't win in 1975 at a later date. So for Denny Miller and Speedway Insiders Paul Page and Bob Gates, send us your comments on speedwayinsiders@gmail.com. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. That's important too. And we'll see you next week, and Godspeed.